It's my pleasure.
We are delighted to have you back, and we have some others who are struggling to get on. We're an older crowd, so the tech stuff is not comes as easy for us as it is for others, but we're truly so glad that you made time to visit with us, and we so enjoyed you coming on Issues That Concern Women back on October 26th. Our main problem was we didn't have enough time, so much to talk about and so little time. And so there's a lot going on in the country right now, Carol, and I know you're concerned. I've been reading your posts, trying to keep up with you, and you're sharing great information, trying to keep us informed as we not only want to talk about things, but we want to transition into doing, being in representative government, how we can go through what the forefathers would want citizens to do in order to be active and effective, because we sure know the other side is, and they're not doing it in a lawful way. And many people are alarmed and concerned, but first and forward, we go forward in the power of prayer and to be effective. But we have to define the issues first, be educated, and then learn how to do. So our topic today from Carol is how political correctness impedes immigration reform. But before we do that, for those of us who need it, for those who may not be, I think there's some people's email addresses I don't recognize. So Carol, would you share a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a former professor of political science and of law at Vanderbilt University. In fact, I taught between Vanderbilt and Princeton for about 28 years. I took early retirement a couple of years ago, and since then, I've been writing, speaking, and pretty much being an activist online. And I care a lot about America. I come from a non-traditional family. I was one of 12 children, born and raised in rural poverty, dropped out of high school, married at 16, early 20s, went to a community college and got the first of 5 degrees, earned a PhD among those 5 degrees, was hired by Princeton, got early tenure, won national prizes, and, was at the top of my field. I later had a Christian conversion experience. I became more conservative, and as I've become more conservative and as I've grown older, I have become more and more concerned about the direction of our nation.
And we share your concern, Carol, and it is born out of a love for our country. Certainly it is not perfect, but I heard something recently, Carol, that I could agree with 100%. It's not about perfection, it's about exceptional. And I think you would agree that our country is that. Your testimony that you just shared with us shows that this country is exceptional. When you look at how Black people arrived in our country and where you are today, where else would that happen in the world?
Well, when I think about slavery, we can focus on the negative parts of slavery, but it remains a fact that that was the vehicle by which my people came to America in large numbers. And Blacks in America are better off than Blacks anywhere else in the world. And if you look at the Bible and the stories of God's providence, he uses all sorts of things to bring about his purposes. And so, being who I am today in America, I certainly wouldn't exist as I am today. And if I look at my roots, my genetic roots, I'm a mixture of many different, I probably have more Native American than Elizabeth Warren. And there's certainly Italians and Irish in my family background. My grandfather was so a Caucasian, he could pass as white. I mean, he was pretty Caucasian. And so in America, we're just a blend of a lot of things.
So there's really no need for hyphens, is there? We're just Americans, period.
We are Americans, and right now we have this immigration crisis, and I think that we are at a point where there is a need to have honest and open conversations, but because of political correctness and the euphemisms that we use, instead of calling illegal, we call it illegal immigration, but the people that come here without proper papers, according to our government, they are properly called illegal aliens. And people that are foreign nationals, they are aliens. They can be legal or illegal, but the language, it makes it impossible for us to talk honestly about what's taking place. And we see this again and again with the attacks on the president and anyone who pushes for law and order, immigration restrictions, for just the following of the laws on the books until we can change them. All of a sudden you're xenophobe, you're a nativist, you're all these bad names just because you want the laws of the land followed. And as a consequence, you find that many members of Congress, they are afraid to have the conversation. They're not looking out after the interests of American citizens because they're afraid of what they're going to be called.
And can I add to that, Carol? If you question the narrative, some of the things that are being told us, don't believe your eyes, right? Yeah, the one reporter with the mic in her hand, and these very healthy men are walking behind her in the caravan, and she's saying it's a mixture of families, and it's mostly men who don't look starved, who look very healthy, and it's like, okay, what am I missing here?
But here's something too, is, like they put all this emphasis on the women and children. And so we are a people that are very compassionate, but as individuals, and those of us who are Christians, as Christian individuals, our obligations to one another and to other human beings, that's quite different from the government. Like governments are put in place to protect nation states. And nation states throughout the biblical times have always had borders. And if you look at the biblical stories, when people passed through other nations, they sought permission to pass through other nations. And so it was not a free-for-all. It was never a free-for-all the way that we try to present it here in the United States.
Well said, Carol. Very well said. And to that end, let's go into some details about that. There are some conservative lawmakers who are trying to have a discussion about this and look for solutions, not just, okay, you all get asylum and that's it. And they want to investigate this more, but they're being hampered. Why? Who is behind that? Would you speak to that?
I mean, the political left is behind it. I read yesterday about Berkeley students, University of California at Berkeley students, and they took $1,500 of student fees, student organization fees, and they're using this money to send to the caravan. And so that's University of California at Berkeley is a public institution. And so that's taxpayers' money that's being used that way. But they also, the students blame the university and accuse the administrators of being white nationalists and not having compassion. And they kept emphasizing those are human beings, and that they themselves were missing school because they had to go to the border. And I mean, it's just totally crazy what's taking place. But with the political left, they want to blur the distinctions between American citizens and people that are non-citizens. And that's why doing the voter, some of the midterm elections in Florida in particular, we heard people talking about count every vote. And there were some non-citizen votes that were in the mix. And two people argued for those non-citizen votes to be counted. The non-citizens have no right. I mean, it's illegal for them to vote in the U.S. And when they do vote, they dilute the votes of American citizens. Yet, because they vote for one particular political party, they're voting for Democrats. The Democrats have an incentive to just flood the country with as many persons as possible because they see them as future Democratic Party voters. And so it's not about what's best for our country. It's about what's going to give my political party the most advantage.
Carol, please give me a few minutes to share something with you. I would like you to comment. This just came to me today. It's from an organization. Have you ever heard of it? CASA in Action.
I have.
Okay, I have not. And I'm on some strange mailing lists, folks. I get some very strange information, but listen to this. It's from Hyattsville, Maryland. CASA's Puerto Rican project in South Central Pennsylvania brings in large numbers of Latinos to vote in midterm elections. Well, if they're registered, that's great. CASA in action relied on door-to-door contacts as well as a team of Puerto Ricans displaced by Hurricane Maria to help turn out voters during the midterm elections. They made phone calls, used text messaging, and implemented CASA's Puerto Rican project to bring out these voters. Immigrants played a large role at the state level, propelling Governor Wolf to re-election. CASA in Action's Puerto Rican project engaged thousands of Puerto Ricans who had to leave Puerto Rico after being displaced by Hurricane Maria. Many of these Boracias relocated to South Central Pennsylvania. CASA registered over 1,800 displaced migrants from Puerto Rico and their friends to come out and vote. At the congressional level, CASA in Action was critical in flipping PA6 for a more progressive candidate. Okay, help me out here if I understand this correctly. Are these folks allowed to vote in Pennsylvania? Is Puerto Rico a state that they are allowed to vote? Can someone, Carol?
Well, Puerto Rico is a territory, of the U.S., but I don't believe that they're allowed to vote in Pennsylvania. And I don't know about, how absentee ballots may have played a role in it, because the Democrats had a new strategy for this election. What they did was go into housing projects and nursing homes and places where there were populations that were not going to vote or not likely to vote, and they gave them absentee ballots. And you may be familiar with the controversy taking place in North Carolina, where a Republican is being accused of abusing absentee votes. And, we're watching that, but I find it very interesting that the Republican Mark Harris that I actually worked for, I went to North Carolina and gave talks on his behalf. His campaign had hired a Democratic operative, a person that worked on campaigns for Democrats and Republicans. And whatever was done in that race, I'm sure they do it in every election. And he just took his skills. But it's not clear because the state has not certified the election. And so the Republican has been accused of ballot harvesting. And that's what California did. They came up with 5 million votes after Election Day. And that flipped for 3 Republicans that looked like they were the winners on Election Day. They ended up losing their seats. And so the Democrats have a whole new strategy of using absentee ballots. And that was not the original purpose for absentee ballots. Absentee ballots are usually intended for people who may be ill, they may be traveling. They have a legitimate reason why they cannot physically go to the voting booth, and laziness doesn't count.
Well said, Carol. And we saw what happened in California, where that state is, I question every election from California. Yes,
I know.
It's that bad, right?
We should just give California its independence. I mean, our nation would be stronger without California. And, I know that there's some great people in California, and, we love them all. And if they don't fit, they need to just move, to Tennessee or
do your own thing.
Some other place.
We believe in rule of law, and we're here to try to fight and preserve it. Carol, moving into the practical side of this, as it's clear, when people have to resort to tactics like this to win, they're not winning legitimately.
But I think it's always been that way. Like if you go back to the 1960s when John F. Kennedy was elected, and we've always heard about in Chicago voting the dead, going to the graveyard. And so I think that that's always been a part of our system, but it doesn't have to be. And that's what I want people to realize, is that we don't have to have that type of democratic republic. And I believe that the spotlight on what happened in Florida, Georgia, California, and now they say North Carolina, that it's a perfect opening for us to push for voter reform at the federal election, at the federal level. And so for federal elections, I mean, we can change the laws. We can't do much about what they do in state and local elections, but for federal elections, we need uniform standards.
And more so than that, Carol, let's start talking practical. what do we, the listeners here in this room, what can we do? Federal standards, get them passed. How do you make sure these things are done, that they are implemented?
Well, I mean, first we just have to find the right legislators, and we just had an election. We've elected people. Those of us who feel strongly enough about the system and want the system to be accountable, and if you really believe that voter fraud took place in Pennsylvania and that there were people who were non-citizens voting, don't let that just be swept under the rug. Address it before 2020. And I also believe I read some articles that that there have been non-citizens voting in Pennsylvania, and it had to do with the motor voter registration.
Mm-hmm.
Like people, they get their driver's license and they register to vote at the same time, and so that if it's true, then that there are people that are voting, then it's diluting the vote of everyone else. And it's up to the voters to hold their politicians accountable and not allow it to be swept under the rug. And in some cases, we need to be more like the Democrats. Like if they're like a dog with a bone. Once they're onto something, they stick with it until they get a resolution. We don't do that. We flit around, and by we, I mean conservatives, from issue to issue. It doesn't have to be that way.
So just don't discuss it, get people all emotional about it, and okay, go about your business. No, follow up and communicate with our elected representatives and say, what are you going to do about this? Like that press release that got into my hands. Mm-hmm. It to me, that should be investigated, and maybe some election results could be overturned if we find out if there were illegals that voted. If we continue on the path of just throwing up our hands and saying, oh, well, why in 2020 would not this be worse, Carol? Why would this not
certainly be the same? And I can tell you that Democrats get away with it all the time. And right now they're trying to not seat a Republican that was elected in North Carolina, claiming that in a county there was some mishandling of absentee ballots. Well, I don't know if there were or not, but in the past, that has not been grounds enough for a Democrat not to be seated. I believe that it needs to be investigated, and we need to make sure that if anything was wrong, that is corrected before 2020. But the whole idea that we have this double standard, that Democrats get away with cheating and Republicans are held accountable, even if they themselves were not personally responsible. I think that some of us, those of us who feel called to do so, we have to make that our issue. Everyone doesn't have the same issue. Everyone's not called to do the same thing. But for people that really care about voting and the integrity of the ballot, then that has to be your priority. And when it comes to immigration, every time a non-citizen votes, that dilutes the power of your vote and mine.
Well stated, very well stated. What value do you place on out-of-staters writing to legislators? I just read that Ms. Snipes, who said she was going to resign, now said she's not going to do that. Does it help for people like us to write to the governor, Rick Scott, and say, hold to your guns, hold this lady accountable?
Well, I think so. I think that someone like Rick Scott needs encouragement, and it doesn't matter where the encouragement comes from. But if you think about it, this lady, Barbara Snipes, her actions affects the whole nation because these are federal elections that were affected. And so we have a right to be, to care and to be concerned. And yes, I would encourage people to encourage the governor and encourage him, to stand strong on that particular issue. And with Barbara Snipes, she apparently is afraid that she will not get her pension. It's not clear that she won't get her pension, but we know that she has not earned her salary over the last 5 or 10 years, and so she's been paid. And I think that it will be played as a racial issue because she's Black, And so race will always be part of the allegation of racism, but Republicans cannot allow that to stop them from doing what needs to be done.
Yeah, we need to evaluate actions regardless of ethnic background, and I think the country's come a long way there. And in the private sector, Carol, if you were caught cheating, you'd be gone out the door and you would lose the benefits along with it. So why should it be different for the public sector versus the private sector is what I would ask.
Well, I mean, sometimes it's unions, but I think that, I will bring race up in the sense that I believe if she were white, especially a white man, she would have been fired like day one, or she would have resigned. And so because she is a Black woman, I think that she gets to hang on longer than she should have.
How would you, Carol?
I said that, you didn't.
What's that? I'm sorry?
I said that.
It's okay with you, How will you address this, what I call reverse racism? Does it help the country? Does it help the national conversation? Is this where we want to be? Where do we want to go as far as, I know this is part of the topic, and I don't want to wander too far from it, but it does, you brought it up, and it's true. We should
I mean, I think that you need to call it out whenever you see it. And unfortunately, if you're white and you're calling it out, you may be called a white supremacist or white nationalist. And I think it's very interesting that white people are positioned so that they can't advocate for themselves, that if they do point out double standards or discrimination against them or their children, that's dismissed. I also find it interesting that so many white youth, young people, have been brainwashed to the point that they will parrot the leftist comments, and they talk endlessly about white privilege. I say, go to East Tennessee or parts of Kentucky and Ohio and other parts of the country where you have poor whites for many generations, people like J.D. Vance's relatives, the author of Hillbilly Elegy, and tell them about their white privilege. I think that what we're calling white privilege, that most of the time it's really about social class, and you have privileged Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, that it's more about social class than it is about skin color. And when you look at whites too, whites have the highest mortality rate. That means that more white people are dying than any other racial or ethnic group, and they're dying from preventable causes, and suicide is one of the leading causes of death, and there's more hopelessness among whites. I think if it were any other racial or ethnic group, that it would be a national priority to find out what was taking place and what we could do to address it. But because it's white people, I think that in this particular moment in history, it's not, people are afraid to speak up.
That is great information, and shame on the press for not getting that out. We had to hear that from you.
Well, I mean, there are professors at Princeton, Ann Case and Angus Deaton, that's written about the rise in white mortality rate. And they have pointed this out. And, I'm sure that they've taken some grief from it. They're not conservatives. They're just presenting their research.
They want to put truth out.
Right. I mean, that's what research used to be about.
Now
it's colored with politics, but it used to be, you ran your numbers and you reported what you found.
And that's what we're trying to do here. Just get truth out. We want it to be colorblind as much as possible. Truth is truth. That is great. This is excellent information. We're going to interrupt right now and open it up to the panelists, which are those who have dialed into the webcast. So join in, and anybody want to talk to Carol? Questions, comments? There's a lot of you out there. Come on. I don't want to do all the talking.
Yeah, don't be shy.
Hi, Jane.
Hello.
Hi.
I just lost the chat. Hold on.
We can see you.
I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me? Okay. Thank you, Carol, for coming on here. We really appreciate it, and I enjoyed meeting you in King of Prussia in October.
Yes.
And you're absolutely correct about the white privilege. If a white person says that, we're racist. And like you said, we need to call things out. We need to call every single thing out and not be afraid of being labeled or name calling, us being name called. We just need to call every single thing out and don't give up. We got to take a page out of the Democratic playbook in everything we do, because it basically is a civil war anymore.
I agree. And I mean, the efforts are to silence people, and it's very effective. A lot of our young people have been silenced. And but yes. And for white people, I say this all the time, that it doesn't matter what you say or do, you are always running the risk of being called a racist, because it's easy to hurl those epithets to shut people down when you're uncomfortable with what they're saying.
Exactly. And our churches need to call it out, and we just cannot stop. We just have to constantly be on the go and double down about it.
Well, the churches do need to do more, but I mean, a lot of them are into, quote, social justice and
exactly
the way of Marxism. And they don't even know that they are engaged in cultural Marxism, and that political correctness and the multiculturalism and all the identity politics that keep us separated and divided, that's just part of the Marxist agenda. God created one race, the human race, and I think that we need to emphasize that. And if we treated everyone equally, we'd have non-discrimination, and that would be against non-discrimination would mean that whites would be protected as well as racial and ethnic minorities, because we treat everyone the same.
Exactly.
Well said.
I'm sorry, hon.
Chris?
Hi.
Hi, Chris.
How are you?
Doing great.
Hey, Carol. How are you? It's Chris Gordon.
I'm doing great, Chris.
Good, good. I'm glad that we were able to connect today. I don't have long. I'm about to go into my tutoring class. Remember the Project Purpose group you met a couple of years ago?
Yes.
I'm about to go into that. I'm waiting for my student. But I just wanted to thank you again for coming out in October, and everything you said is on board and absolutely right. We need to be bold and move forward and just stand up for what is right, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you do that, and with great eloquence, and I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions. You've answered them all, and I'm just right behind you.
All right.
All right, dear. I'll talk to you soon. I got to go. All righty. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Jane. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Chris.
My
Bye-bye.
question for the panelist, how do you see a where to from here? Very, very concerned about the legitimacy of elections. Nancy, do I overstate the case at all? Am I in hyperbole land at all? Can you hear me, Nancy?
I can hear your question.
Nancy is with the Montgomery County GOP, and I would love to hear her share some things with you, Carol, and I'd love to hear your comment on that. She's got her phone muted, so I don't know if she can hear. Okay, anybody else? Karis, anybody?
Hi there.
Hey, Karis.
I just was rereading through Red McDaniel's Scars and Stripes. I don't know if you're acquainted with that book. He was one of the ranking officers at the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. And it's been a rough read in the sense of revisiting the cultural differences of what they went through. But speaking to his burden as a Christian man in the prison, his faith tried and tested to the core, but willing to fight communism and all that it represented. And I think there were even some things said earlier today about the end of the Soviet Union, and people are so mistaken to think that communism is no more, or that the efforts to undermine and dismantle the United States and our free government are no more. We've had enemies from the beginning. And communism did not begin with Karl Marx. And it's been very disturbing to see the behind the scene agitators that were putting these caravans together and using these people as pawns in their game to weaken the fabric and the fiber of the United States. And we're in a real predicament because the general news service will not reveal the truth of what's going on behind the scenes, whether it's in the election fraud or whether it's in the nature of some of these caravans that are coming through. But what are we to do now?
I mean, you certainly stated the problem, and I agree with you that America is being dismantled from within, and the people that are disadvantaged, whether we're talking about the caravanners or minorities, racial and ethnic minorities, they are being used in a way to undermine the country by people that don't seem to have a genuine interest in their long-term benefit. They're being used for short-term gain.
That's true. That is true. In some research earlier this morning, I was pulling together threads they're just very heartbreaking. But anyway, between the Miles Horton, who founded the Highlander Folk School, which Eleanor Roosevelt attended, and the minorities who are being used by hidden overlords, you might say, and how it all connects also with, and the same folks were involved with Clarence Darrow in the Scopes trial, which sought to promote evolution and destroy the faith in the Creator.
Yes.
So many of these threads come together, and they're not just individual efforts or efforts of the enemy. I mean, they come from the same source, whether it's evolution versus creation, whether it's civil rights so-called versus our Bill of Rights. They have used the civil rights card to dismantle the Bill of Rights. And they have used a distorted definition of justice to destroy justice.
Well, you seem to have a firm grasp of everything that's taken place. How do you use your information, or how do you plan to use it?
Well, coming up December the 15th, we'll be hosting our 27th annual Bill of Rights commemorative banquet. December 15th is Bill of Rights Day. And we started back in 1991 when on the Bill of Rights bicentennial at Independence Park, the honored guests for their events there were leading actors in a summer-long production of Inherit the Wind. And I just happened to graduate from William Jennings Bryan College in Tennessee, and I knew what that was about.
Right.
So what did that have to do with Bill of Rights? It was only an insult to the Creator. So our byline is endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. And so promoting both the divine author of liberty and the necessity of faith for the maintenance of, and I say faith in the God of our fathers, for the maintenance of our civil and religious freedoms. It will not last without a return to the faith of our fathers. And also, I offer tours of Philadelphia to explore our legacy of liberty and faith. And these are not just hobbies. I mean, to me, it's a matter of deep concern
Well,
about
it sounds like a life's work. It sounds like a life's work. And I think that on some of these other issues, we need individuals that are as committed as you are to whatever God has called them to do. And it's going to take all of us working together in our separate spheres. You know, we're working towards the same goal, but we're not all called to do the same thing.
You're absolutely right. And it's a mistake to think that everybody should jump on our bandwagon and abandon the burden that God has given to them.
Yes.
I want you to know how much I appreciate, first of all, your spots on WFYL. That's where I first heard you. And then your remarks in October. And even the one that you had today. Pardon me, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it really stood out to me this morning when I heard it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, for these conversations also.
Thank you, participants. Karis and Carol, you put out some wonderful information. And I wonder if anybody else here has any thoughts on what do we do with this information? You know, I've been harping on conversations on the culture is designed to say, hey, let's not just talk, but let's do. How can we interact with our representatives better? And let me put it out there that we don't advocate torching limousines and smashing windows. We don't think that's the way to accomplish things. I met a conservative activist several years back, and Joe Panos, and he made such an impact on me because he preached, make friends of your representatives and your elected officials. And that was his thing. He is good friends with Andy Dinniman, a Democrat. They have virtually next to nothing in common, but they're civil to one another. And I admire that personally. For those who would, do that, I think that's great. They don't talk that much anymore simply because they don't have that much to talk about. But if we can establish relationships with our representatives and our senators, I've been told when I've gone out to Harrisburg that when you take one day a year to visit them, one day a year, it makes a tremendous impact. Because these guys and gals are getting hit up by walking around money special interests all the time. But when their constituents, the people who vote for them, show up, it makes a great difference. And when you're educated, when they can tell that you're knowledgeable on the issues, it makes a difference. You serve as a retardant against this corruption and this evil. And this is what we want to do here. And we want to spread this even more. As Carol is able, she's a very busy person. I don't know how much more she'll be able to do this in the future, but to come on and educate us and continue to teach us, inform us and teach us activism. We'd like to do that. And if you're in on that and you think that's what I'm saying is the right way to go, let me know. Let's continue the conversation. It may be we want to reconvene and say, hey, as a result of this, we could do this, we could do that. We could create a letter writing campaign. Carol, your thoughts? More ideas?
I would say that for the participants, and I believe I see that there are maybe 10 participants, that if each person would either email or post something on Facebook about if you're concerned about voter fraud that may have taken place in Pennsylvania or California, other parts of the country, start talking about that on social media. And that's one thing. Or you can write an opinion piece. Like I know that a lot of you all are great writers. Write a 400 to 600 word opinion piece and put that in your local newspaper. Or even, aim higher than your local newspaper. But there are definitely things that we can do.
And it makes a difference, folks. When people know that, citizens know that they're aware that the wool is not being pulled over their eyes, it does make a difference. So those are great starting points, Carol. And anybody else have any final comments? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Carol,
Hi there. I was wondering the logistics of getting involved locally, just where we are, to ensure that the election results are accurately reported and no shenanigans going on. What's the best avenue for doing that?
Well, if you know someone on your local election board, and how many of you volunteered, to be poll watchers? Because that was very important. in Nashville. I know some people that volunteered, and because they happened to be in the right precinct at the right time, they prevented, some people that were not qualified to vote from voting, because the people that were processing the people that were there to vote, they were very much aware that there were outsiders watching what they were doing. And so if people didn't have the proper documentation, maybe if there hadn't been a poll watcher there, they would have let them vote. But because there were a couple of people standing there that they knew were representing, in this particular case, Republicans, they told several people that they didn't have what they needed. They needed to go and do something different. So find out if there were problems in the precincts that you're aware of. And there was this massive attempt in Nashville to register a lot of people. And I don't know if all of them were citizens or not. But now that the election is over, it would be a good time to follow up and have someone check to make sure that everyone who voted was a citizen. And if they were not, make sure that something is done before 2020, because in 2020, we don't need voter fraud. We don't need people repeating the same tactics that they may have gotten away with in 2018 and 2016.
So, Carol, it sounds like we should close out. That was a great question, Karis. That's a great thought. We should close out with the challenge, and for myself as well, to contact our local election board and see how we can verify the results. We don't have to come in with an attitude or anything like that. Just we're concerned citizens, and we want to find out how we can verify results. And we can share the results on social media with one another and challenge others to do the same, citizen activists. And I don't know if anybody has any comments about that, if they could weigh in with that, any suggestions, ideas?
Another thing someone could do is, there's been a lot of articles around the country about voter fraud, to collect those articles and send those articles on to your legislator or on to people. Don't let those articles get lost, because it looks like we have a national problem. We want members of Congress to address it with federal legislation, so that at least when it comes to those federal positions, they're not going to be stolen because of local shenanigans.
Are you able to volunteer as a poll watcher for a precinct that's not your own?
Yes. I mean, at least you can, I believe in most places, but your party should have instructions on how you can sign up to volunteer to be a poll watcher. And I think they probably send people wherever they're needed.
I just know they run a pretty tight ship here with the insiders and the outsiders. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, but you should be able to volunteer and be there. It's important to have many pairs of eyes watching.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we are in the closing session here, and in the minutes, and I think this has been an excellent session. And
may I just mention one other thing?
Please, yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't think of this earlier, but I had a 1950-some American history textbook published by Houghton Mifflin. I don't know where that book is at the moment, but what I remember is it speaking of the election of Andrew Jackson, where people, new immigrants who did not speak the language, who were not yet citizens, were being allowed to vote in state elections and for federal officers. And the trouble that was causing, and there was much concern about, understandably, but they made the comment about the Democrat Party using the foreign vote in the 1830s to get into office, and it may observe that they had used that avenue ever since. So this is not just a new problem, it goes way back.
It certainly does, and it's interesting to me how the Democrat Party presents themselves as the party of civil rights. They're the party of minorities, and I was recently doing some research about my home state of Virginia, trying to tell the story of how I became a Republican. And what I noted was that, Virginia led the way in fighting school integration. And there was a person, one of the senators from Virginia was on the Rules Committee. He blocked the civil rights bills. And so if you look at the Democratic Party, I mean, they fought until they lost. And then when they lost, then all of a sudden they co-opted minority voters. But they've always been about their own survival and about expansion, but not necessarily about serving the needs of the nation as a whole.
Right.
They talk a good game, but at the end of the day, if you actually look at the follow through, it's not been in the interest of the nation. The Republican Party is not perfect by any means, but if you look at its party platform and the way the true believers operate, there is a difference like night and day. I'm a Republican because of the commitment of the party platform to God, country, and family. And that is part of what made America great. And that's what we're going to lose if Republicans start looking more and more like Democrats.
True.
Excellent questions. Someone else, Diane, I think you want to join in.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Two quick things. One, Dr. Swain, every time I hear you now, I'm even more impressed with your courage in attacking this issue. So many of us we're afraid to step on toes, and I applaud you for this. I haven't finished reading your book, White Nationalism, because it's a big concern of mine, and you've done a very, very monstrous job addressing that, so I appreciate that. But the other thing, regarding calling out those who are allowing illegal votes, I don't, fraud sounds so soft, doesn't seem to really touch the subject, but it's illegal. I wonder, what do you think of addressing it directly with, at least in Pennsylvania, our Secretary of State, because I thought that the Secretary of State would be the one to address and make right any issues that.
Right, you do both. I mean, with the state level voting, yes, certainly go to the Secretary of State. But what I'm really pushing for, and I think we need, is federal legislation so that the voting is more uniform across the country.
I agree.
You followed what happened in California on election night. There were 3 Republicans, and it looked like they had won solidly. But over the next, few days and weeks, Democrats counted and found 5 million absentee ballots, and that changed the outcome. And they engaged in something, and this is legal in California, ballot harvesting, where relatives and people who live in the same household can mail someone else's ballot in. So pretty much, like my mother lives with me. She's elderly, she knows nothing about politics. Well, I could register my mother and be voting her. Maybe I will.
I was stunned to hear you say that earlier about 5 million votes. Boy, would that turn the election. So I only have one. I only have one other thing I wanted to share with the group. I picked up a book the other day, and I just read the whole thing today. It's only 75 pages. It's by an author named Andy Andrews, and I encourage people to get this book, because the title of the book is "How Do You Kill 11 Million People?"
I've read it. It's a great book, isn't it?
Oh my! Isn't it something?
Shall we tell them the secret?
Yes. Yes. May I?
Yeah.
Lie to them. I had no idea how Hitler's troops got all those 11 million, I forget how many 100,000 Jews to get on those trains to Dachau and to the gas chamber. I was stunned to read it, but he really has a way of poking you. and one of the chapter titles is how loud do you sing? You remember that, Dr. Swain? How loud do you sing while the trains are rumbling by with millions of people on the way to the gas chambers? You're singing in church on Sunday morning, and you don't want to hear the screams of the people and the trains rolling by, so we just sing louder. How loud have we been singing to cover up all the inhumanity and all the lies and all the fraud? We have to actually shut up and listen. And
I see people all the time, like, even some of the candidates that just got elected, and they immediately started doing the opposite of what they said they were going to do. And the people who voted for them making excuses because they can't believe that they were duped.
Yes. And I had such faith in this organization. It sounded so magnanimous, called the League of Women Voters. And I was sharing the other day, I thought these people must be really above board and honest. Well, come to find out, I'm full of it, because they're not.
Well, all of these organizations have been taken over by the left. That maybe when they were first started, they were different. Yeah. But if you look at a lot of organizations today, look at the ACLU. It's been destroyed. At one time, they had some balance. They cared a little bit about the Constitution. Now they argue against the due process rights of individuals. That's the total opposite of what they are supposed to stand for.
And this Southern Poverty Law Center.
Oh, they were always, I think.
Were they?
Okay. Well, I mean, if you look at the person who founded it, he was kind of a shyster. But they have a great sounding name, and it sounds noble, but it's always been about the money.
And
well, listen, I appreciate your responses, and thank you for doing what you do. Appreciate it, Dr. Swain.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. We could add NAACP to that list. They were started out as a very noble organization. Hey, look at our founding colleges, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, all of them were Harvard was a preacher's college. And Carol, as you stated, they were all hijacked at some point. And so
I suggest we do the same, that we go into those organizations.
And hijack them back?
Yeah, hijack them back. You just keep your mouth shut until you get a critical mass. And when you get a critical mass, you fire the other people, and then you replace them with people that share your vision.
I had a friend who once said that it's only a few people running this town. I don't see why just a few couldn't turn it around.
That's true. It's not as bad as we think it is.
And you look at Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk and Denise D'Souza, who go into these campuses. They have over 40% of students who follow them, like them, believe them. The professors are going bonkers over it. They're pulling everything out they can to keep these guys from coming on campus. But so there's something about the truth. It's just in their heart of hearts, these kids know that when these guys stand up, generally speaking, they're on target. And we're trying to do what they do in a different way. But it heartens me as I talk to people like Carol and others who are joining the alternative media. A friend of mine who owns RedStateTalkRadio.com, Scott Adams, says that the fastest growing form of media is citizen journalism. He said that's how people are getting informed these days, because they know they're being had.
Right, we are being had.
And so we can inform ourselves. There's plenty and plenty ways to do that. Okay, Carol, is this finally it? Is this it? Shall we call it?
It's been a pleasure, and I wish you well, with the conversations, and hope to participate again in the future.
I would love that to continue on, especially as far as the doing part of it. I would ask our guests, our panelists, if you would pray and think about ways that we can move forward and in doing, putting into action what we've heard. And I would love to hear back from you so that we can continue on and bring others on board with us, so that we can have as legitimate of elections as possible and keep rule of law at the top, so that we don't degenerate into every man doing that which is right in his own eyes. And let's bring the rest of the Titanic out of the water. So thank you again, Carol. Very
Thank
much
you.
appreciate it. And listeners, panelists, thank you for joining us. Have a great evening.